We hope you find some great value in this webinar. We're going to be focusing on crafting a strong nonprofit website RFP, more so from our perspective as web designers and web developers. We're not really going to be covering a lot of the legal things that go into RFPs or any of those. That's beyond our pay grade. We'll also skip over some of the evaluation criteria and some of those things you want to include. We will share a template that we've shared with some other nonprofits after the meeting with some of those things, just so you have that as an added resource in addition to the slides. And yeah, so we created this webinar because we often do see RFPs that have plenty of that legal information and not enough of the scope information. So hopefully by the end of this webinar today, you'll leave with some good tips on what you can do with your own RFP to make it clear to people like us and companies like ours. So I'll give a little bit more of an introduction of who we are as well. So good. So Mary, do you want to give your quick introduction and then I'll do mine?
Yeah, sure. Hey everyone, I'm Mary Heichel. I am a senior graphic designer and web designer, and I've been doing what I love to do for about 17 years now. And with Compete Now, I love helping clients go from start to finish on their projects, leading them one step at a time. And thanks for coming to the webinar. I'm excited.
Great. Thanks, Mary. My name's Donato. I'm the president of Compete Now Website Design and Digital Marketing. And I work with clients mostly on the strategy side of things, identifying the pages that are needed, the structure, and really walking them through the whole process. A little bit of background with Compete Now, we've built hundreds of websites over the years. Really around the pandemic is when we started kind of specializing in nonprofit types of websites, foundations, housing assistance types of places, more standard kind of charities and other kind of basically it was interesting because we learned how many different kind of nonprofits there actually are, some government funded, some not, and so on. So we did create a lot of resources for nonprofits. When I share the slides, you'll be able to click this link and see some of the ones that we've created in addition to this. So why don't we jump into a bit of an overview of what we're going to cover today. Mary is going to cover the beginning. It's understanding the designer's perspective for what to include in RFP. Then I'm going to go in and start talking about how you define a clear scope within your website RFP and talk through some of the common pitfalls to avoid. And then we'll have time for some live Q&A. We did have some people send some questions in advance, and we'll answer those. If you all on this webinar do not have any questions pop up, but if they do, you can either use the chat feature or this Zoom webinars has a kind of a nifty Q&A feature where you can, please type your questions into that area. We'll see them come through, and then we'll answer them for you at the end of the presentation. We're going to try to be concise in our own way presenting, but thorough. And hopefully we are hoping to leave time for Q&A at the end. Otherwise, you'll have a little bit more time added onto your day. All right, Mary, I think I'm going to let you take over sharing, and you can share your slide and start going through what you like to know as a designer.
Yeah, sure.
Before going into a website project.
All right, so let me see.
Yep, I see your
Can
screen.
you see my screen? Okay, awesome.
Yep.
So yeah, now we will dive into how to frame your requirements to attract quality proposals and understanding the designer's perspective. So design really plays a critical role in the success of any website. And here are some elements that web design companies look for when they receive RFPs from nonprofits. So the detailed project objectives, these are clear goals and outcomes that nonprofits aim to achieve with the new website. And then target audience insights. This is really information about the primary users of the website to tailor the design and functionality accordingly. And then design preferences and references. So these are things like color, fonts, style, features, and links to specific reference websites. All of these things are very important when it comes to understanding the designer's perspective. And then, so what to include in your RFP? Clear success factors or metrics in order of importance for a successful project. So what are your actual end goals of the site? Are they to increase donations, to recruit employees, volunteers, or event participants? Maybe to elevate your brand or to position your nonprofit as a thought leader? Key audiences for your new website in order of priority. So key audiences, examples include the people your nonprofit serves, current or prospective donors, volunteers, board members, policymakers, sponsors, funders. And you can define these in order of priority, excuse me, because we'll take these into consideration when we're building out the hierarchy of information, images, and design of the website. And then take a look at a bunch of different websites when you're thinking about your RFP, and you can put together a list of 4 to 5 reference websites that your organization likes.
At least.
Yeah, at least. Exactly. Thanks, Donato.
Mhm.
That your organization likes and notes about each. And so I actually just pulled up a couple of websites that we've done as examples. So maybe, on this website, maybe you like how it's really easy to find the services on the site.
Mhm.
And then maybe on this website, you really like the color palette, or you like some of the design elements in here. Or maybe you
Mhm.
like how these hovers work.
Mhm.
And then maybe on this website, you like how impactful the photography is, or how important the calls to action are on the site. Or then maybe on this website, you like some of the functionality of it. All right.
Yeah, key point is you don't have to like everything about all your reference sites, but if you can point out some very specific things, it can really go a long way to have us really understand your goals, objectives, and what your true, success factors are for the project.
Yeah, thank you, Donato. So then also to include are notes about the status of your branding, logo, and design assets, and if any of these services should be included with the scope. So do you have any brand guidelines that you follow? Are there any specific fonts or colors to use with your logo? Or if you don't have specific brand guidelines or even a logo, should logo development or branding be included within the scope of the project? And so I actually just pulled up a logo that we did recently. And this is kind of an example. A lot of branding guidelines sometimes look a little bit more expanded than this, but this is just to give you an idea of, maybe you have the different versions of your logo and then the color palette.
Mm-hmm. Can really go a long way when you're thinking RFP and scope. What do you have for assets based on the web reference websites that you like and that you are going for? Do you even have the assets to make that possible, or should that also be part of your scope? And you can kind of adjust the budget around how to make that really happen with the project.
Thanks, Donato. So then the last thing I have on my list is notes about availability of images and videos to use on the website, or whether stock media will be heavily relied upon. So images and videos are powerful tools that enhance your website content and engage your visitors. They help to convey your message, showcase your services, and they also create an emotional connection with your audience. They help make your site memorable and can help it perform better as well. So because of this, using them effectively requires careful consideration and planning.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else on this, Donato?
No, no, I think we can move on to mine.
All right, I'll kick
I'll
it back
take
to
over.
you.
Great. So one thing that we learned, pretty early on or over the years with nonprofits is that you're really trying to get as best value as possible. Of course, any funds that are going towards anything other than the mission need to be well spent. And when you're defining a scope for a website project, the best way to get the most for your budget is to have a very clearly defined scope of work. But these nonprofits, it's not what you do every day, and it can be very hard to prepare such a specific document in order to provide that and really get that maximum value of the project. So we're going to go over some of the things to consider when putting together your scope of work. It's often, and unfortunately in many RFPs, the smallest part of an RFP in terms of clearly defining the work to be done. But if you're able to accomplish a thorough RFP, you're not going to get such a huge wide range of quotes and proposals of all different things, and you'll get something that's much more geared towards what you need and what you want to further your mission. Some of the key components of a clear and actionable RFP are, again, providing the detailed requirements, sharing your budget and timeline, and including evaluation criteria. Those are some of the most important things, and we're going to go a little over each of these. What to include if you want to try to clearly define your scope. And I tried to set up these things to include in a way that you should be able to do this even with very little knowledge of how a website is built, even if you haven't been through the process before. The first thing that I have personally felt is so useful for websites like this is if you could create a simple list of functional requirements of the site. Functional requirement might even sound a little intimidating. It's really just what do you need the website to do? List it out, call out specific things. On the next slide, I do have some examples of what I mean by that. But if you just simply put in even a very rough list of what you're looking to do and what you'd hope for it to do that you've seen on other websites, experienced designers like ourselves will be able to understand what you're saying and also propose solutions within the proposals. Maybe there's a way to do what you want that is a little bit different or easier that would work better within your budget. So just getting that list of requirements is really helpful to really understand what you're looking for, especially if you're providing reference websites. As a designer, when we look at reference websites, we might be looking at things that you don't even care about and don't realize really don't need to be included within the scope that could greatly expand the scope. And in some cases, if you're like, oh no, we just like that little feature, you say, oh, that's easy, that's fine. So including some kind of list is helpful for that. On a separate list, list any third-party integrations the website might need. That's where there's like different surprises that can pop up over the course of a project that you really don't want a vendor to leave out of a scope of work. How directly do you want it to integrate with your donation software? Is it just a a link that goes to some other website, or is it something that really needs to be deeply embedded into your website in a way that might not be as out of the box or turnkey as expected? Even if you don't know how that would work, just saying that that's the level you want, then the vendors can tell you, A, if it's possible, and B, what could be the cost of that? And is it worth the investment? Events management needs, there's a lot of like nonprofits that some only have major events, maybe 5, 6, 1 a year. The way that the web design company is going to build your website will probably be a lot different depending on the sheer number of events that you have. So talking through a little bit about what you need for events or events calendars is helpful in something like this. Does your site have a membership aspect needed? Whether it's integrating with some other third-party membership software or actually creating it within your website on top of the public-facing standard website. Also, what's been more frequent is our nonprofits asking for some kind of portal, whether it's for employees or whether it's for their board. So outlining that, and even if it's like a future wish list thing, doesn't hurt to put that in there, because just like I was saying before, it can really alter the way we think about a project and how we recommend actually moving forward with building that website, thinking in terms of what you want in the future. A sample draft sitemap is really helpful for a website. And it's really becoming more and more clear to us over in the recent year or two even. We're building websites now that it's the third or fourth iteration of a lot of these organizations' websites that comes with, if you've moved houses or moved around, you've probably brought a lot of junk with you from move to move. And it's finally getting to the point now where organizations are doing a little bit of housekeeping and getting that, kind of getting rid of some of that old content, outdated information, and transferring it to the new site. So it's very helpful when scoping a project to know, what does the sitemap look like? Should I think of the size of your website as your existing site, or are we looking at kind of trimming things up within reason somewhat? And any web designer, for the most part, I believe that's, doing the right process is going to go through a site mapping process with you anyway. But when it comes to trying to scope out the project, it's helpful to have a rough idea of like, what is the size of the site that you're looking for, and how do you want to prioritize that information? I would also recommend really stating whether there's any preferences or requirements for how a site must be built. Um, we see a lot of the RFPs seem somewhat either wanting WordPress or wanting Squarespace or some other system. But sometimes you'll see that are just like, oh, we'll go with what you recommend. That's fine too, but really putting that in, if there's any like real hard decision, or if there's any strict line on what you want the website to be built with, it's good to know that earlier on the process, because if it's something that the designers or the developers aren't familiar with, they can at least eliminate themselves early on, or eliminate themselves once they make it clear they don't have experience with that particular system. I think providing some basic information about your existing site is really important, especially as we keep rebuilding new sites. Often they already are in WordPress, but it's helpful to know, yeah, it was WordPress, but what is your theme? What are some limitations of that website? That can also help get added to your list of functional requirements, or the success factors where we really want the website to just work better. All that list is very important. And it's also important to know if there are any existing third-party integrations on your current site that you want to keep, because that will either need to be a new scope, or the vendors can evaluate that existing connection and say, hey, we're starting fresh, we're building a new site, but that piece can be migrated over to the new site at no additional cost or a minimal cost to the organization. If you have a preferred process for the project, it's nice to put that in. This is something, if you do enough research, you might realize, hey, we really want to go through a thorough discovery, and we really want to go through like surveys and additional research at every step. If you have an idea and you've been through the process multiple times, it's good to put that into the RFP and make it clear that that the time to do that, or the familiarity with that type of a process, is a requirement. So functional list, I was nervous might intimidate some people, so I wanted to put together a very basic sample functional list that you might include. And it doesn't need to be that many bullet points, but some of the examples are maybe you've already decided going into the project that you want a mobile first website. Maybe you already know that 80% of the people, and this varies for many sites, but let's just say, okay, we've acknowledged, we looked at Google Analytics, and we get 80% of our traffic on mobile. So you would go into the RFP saying we want a mobile first design preferred. Maybe you would say we want to integrate with our Bloomerang donation software. That would be a good list of one where, this is one that we had on this site where it's Bloomerang and it's a donation. So you can see it was just a simple code that we just needed to restyle and make match the website. But having that in the list of requirements would be helpful as part of an RFP. A safely exit button, very easy feature to include on a website, but it's important to put that as just an example of something you're looking for it to be a requirement of the website. So that's just a simple plugin, like you can see here on this one. And if you click safely exit, you're in Google. So just a common requirement of some of the sites we've worked on. Board portal is good to know. That at least opens up the question. So at least the vendors can say, hey, you want a board portal? how robust does that need to be? What are the features? And you might have to really break that out more through the question and answer process or as a separate area of your RFP. But at least by stating it that that needs to be part of the scope, it will help you drill down to a more specific RFP or at least proposal for your needs. Um, Lining something like this is nice. Website must be available in multiple languages. That's where vendors will be able to propose. How do we do that? Google Translate. Does the site actually have to be literally translated? Which languages and, what order? It really helps set it up so that we know that that's a minimum requirement that you're looking for. Same thing with ADA compliance. What level? A, double A, double A with some triple A. Really getting into that level of compliance that you're looking for is helpful. Talking, if you have a site where search engine optimization is going to be a piece of the project, it should always be at least some part of the project, carrying over 301 redirects and other best practices for search engine optimization. But if you want it to be a more significant part of your overall website project, then you should mention it in your lists and then expand on that further. Having a robust blog and news section with filtering and tagging, that's good to get that out there so that the vendors can respond and understand, how much news do you have and how can that dynamically be fed across the website. This was an example of one that we did where, when you go to their blog and news, you can search by keyword, they have filter by topic, and they have filter by type. So it's nice to be able to do that. And then throughout the website on different pages, if it's a primary care topic and it's a bit of news, it'll automatically show up on that proper area of the website. So that's just an example of another functionality. Alert bars and pop-ups. This is one that I always like seeing in RFPs. I think it's so direct, simple, but letting us know that you do want to have some unique features that you often see on lead generation websites, but they're very useful for nonprofits where you maybe you'll have a pop-up promoting some kind of a campaign or just signing up for the newsletter, or you have an alert bar that pops down from the top with important announcements about deadlines or application dates or so on. They're so useful, and it's easy to include in a proposal, but it's just nice to have there so we have a really good idea of what you're looking for. So those are the examples. And then I apologize for the wording of the slide. I do want these slides to be useful when we email them out as a PDF as well. So these are just some examples. If you're really stuck or you're new to this and you're just trying to get ideas, look at your existing website and write down what you'd like to keep. Maybe you really dislike the design of the site, but there are some unique features or things that it does that you want to carry over to the new site. And then once you've looked at all those various reference websites, jot down what you like about those from a functional standpoint and list them out. And that'll give you a great start, even way ahead of even really large organizations that we've received proposals from. Oops, I got to go back one. So another thing that's helpful, we talked about that housekeeping that's been happening. If you don't really give us any idea of the housekeeping, we're just going to assume that it's the same size site that's going to be the new. Or in some cases, it's almost like hard to really know the sheer size of a website, especially if you have a lot of hidden pages. And there's one website we're proposing on now where every year they have an annual award, and every award, when you click into it, you discover that there's like 4 sub pages where they actually created a separate page for every single awardee. And they're like, wow, that's we don't need that anymore. Maybe in the last year or two, but not going back many years back. So it's good to at least count those pages and put them into a simple table like this. How many pages are you going to have? How many design templates are needed? And by doing that draft sitemap, you might have a better idea of how many templates. You might need obviously a home page, a service page template that you want to try to follow, an about page. Really get an idea for like how many templates if I have 80 pages, then maybe you need 9 or 10 templates. That's helpful to really outline, or if you can add into your RFP. Number of blogs, news, and stories are important. Understanding how many blogs need to be migrated, how many news, how many stories, so that we as the vendors can evaluate your current site. And most of the time we can tell, but depending on if it's WordPress to WordPress, are these posts that we can export and import, and it's not going to take a lot of effort? Or are they stories with lots of different things all over the place that were built with some other page builder that we're going to have to redo all over again? That can help a lot with scoping. Listing your preferred CMS. I kind of had that in the previous slide, but you can also include it in a simple table like this. A lot of times what can affect the cost is how much back and forth is there going to be with the content migrating. What is the percentage of website content that's going to migrate from the old site to the new? It can help vendors to quote all that extra time it will take helping to really manage that inventory of content with the client and the back and forth to make sure it's all up to date before being integrated in the website. So if half the content's going to be migrated, that's great. If 90%, that's great. If you can give a rough idea of what percentage, that is very helpful. And it can also give the vendors an opportunity to say, hey, we have a copywriter who can work with you to actually work through updating that content. And let's look at the total budget, and can we make it so that the website part is low enough that you can include copy editing and copywriting time within that budget to make it get finished on time. So also the size of the team involved with the website process is important. If you plan to have a committee of 9 people involved in the whole process, usually you need to extend the timeline and also the amount of hours to go back and forth and have all that extra input. Ideally, we'd recommend more so a size of 1 to 3 direct contacts within an organization where they're responsible for reporting back to maybe a larger group if needed to get more higher level decisions or approvals along the way. So budget and timeline. This is where a lot of nonprofits get uncomfortable for a couple of reasons with budget. You just don't know, right? You don't do this every day. You don't really know what the cost should be. So why throw out a number? And also probably just fear that the vendors are just going to try to get the maximum amount possible based on what you say. But the budget can be very helpful because once we understand your reference sites, your requirements, the number of pages, we can kind of let you know if the budget's reasonable or not and what we could do within that budget once you have that. But if you're not going to provide it, I'll give you a little bit of a few tips around it, or even if you are. Breaking out the functional requirements of the website between must-have and nice-to-have is very helpful, so that if we know the budget or we don't know the budget, at least we can give a little bit of an indication of what could affect that budget or what can be kind of, skipped as part of that process to fit a tighter budget. If you have the time, we've had many organizations do this with us, and I think it's perfectly fine. Interviewing multiple companies with notes you've gathered about your functional requirements and websites that you like and timeline and all the things we talked about in the previous, couple of slides, and bringing that information to the vendors and at least getting a ballpark range of what to expect for a budget. And then maybe you can adjust your requirements based off of that feedback, or maybe you'll be happily surprised to know that your budget is more than sufficient for what you need. But I think before putting out an RFP, really getting some input from companies like ours is certainly worthwhile. And I believe most are willing to at least commit to a half an hour to an hour call to go over your needs. If it's possible, list a range or a not to exceed budget. So you don't have to put your actual budget in, but if you could provide a range or a not to exceed, I kind of like the idea of a range, even if it's a wide range, just so that you can compare apples to apples with companies that are in that range. And some companies might say doesn't meet our minimum. They'll be eliminated. Everybody saves time reading and interviewing that particular company. But at least everybody can kind of get into the same ballpark, and then you're really just picking a vendor that has the best experience, understood the needs best, and provided a proposal that was actually addressing all the needs outlined in the RFP. If there is a required launch date or time, that should be in the RFP. It's very important so that companies can really understand, okay, what does the timeline look like, and can we meet that timeline? And also, it can be upfront and say, hey, that timeline does not sound like enough time, and they can be upfront with you about that, and then you can reassess if needed. Factor in the availability of staff to help. So when you're thinking of your timeline and when do you need the project actually completed by, think about it is a collaborative process, and there's going to be, if you're expecting to rewrite half the content on the website and you're not going to have any outside help, who's going to be needed to kind of jump in on that process, and how could that work? I think it's good to have vendors. I think this would be maybe in the evaluation criteria or just the RFP checklist of what you want from vendors, but really including the timeline within that, and even a draft schedule. Like, how is this process going to play out with revisions and all of that over the course of a project to ensure that that project is done on time, within budget, and everyone's happy. So we'll talk a little bit about the pitfalls to avoid when creating an RFP for web design companies. It's pretty simple. I think following a lot of the steps when it comes to the scope part of it and the references will help you avoid those common pitfalls. And the implications of not, going through that process, you really want to take your time to get that clearly laid out. Like we said before, RFPs or nonprofits only have so much budget, and you want to get the maximum value for that budget. So taking the time to clearly define that is really important. So start with your own information gathering based on something like we've been talking about today. Interview multiple companies that you think could possibly be a good fit, maybe through your organization's a Google search, or maybe some of those websites you found that you really like. They have the designers link in the bottom, and you kind of contact those companies, and then interviewing them, getting their feedback. You also probably, if you like them, get some people on the list that you'll actually invite to the RFP by the end of it, and then work through the process of having a very clearly defined RFP. Because if you don't, you'll end up with proposals that are all over the map in terms of cost, scope, and really, it's going to be hard to know which company is the right fit when you're getting such a wide variety. So how do you really narrow down from that? At that point, it probably becomes more just about the budget and trying to find a company within that. And you might not get a company that did not understand the needs of the project. And once you're already a month or two into it, you'll be stuck, and it could take a lot longer and a lot more cost and all the different headaches that everyone wants to avoid when it comes to a project like this. So those are our tips now. One thing you could potentially do if it's a much more complicated project or a really large site is a lot of companies will provide paid discovery. So you can hire a company like ours for, it really depends, but a minimal amount of hours to really get into the back of your site and help you with some of that pre-planning process, so you could have a very clear scope defined for the project. All right, so that was a lot of what we wanted to talk about today when it came to the RFP process. So I'm going to check and see if we had any questions come through now. And if you haven't had a chance to put your questions in, please feel free to add them. Otherwise, I have the questions on my side here that we could also view. So one of the questions that I saw come through was, how do we handle Q&A with potential vendors? And that's a really good question. So the process we like for Q&A is giving a date that all the vendors can submit their Q&A, and then basically the organization collects all that question and answer, puts it into one document, answers all of the questions and answers, and emails out those question and answers to all the vendors. That's been really helpful. It can also, shed some light additionally on the project of things to consider that the vendors didn't ask themselves. So that's definitely a great way to handle Q&A and make it so that all the vendors have the same questions and answers and can address your needs from there. All right, what else do we have here for questions? How long should the RFP process take? I think the whole process probably could be faster, but if you plan for, a 2 or 3 month process, that should be plenty of time, I think, because you probably want about a month before you even contact anyone, putting together your requirements and your wish list and talking to people and getting reference websites. then maybe you'll take a few weeks interviewing companies, getting a better idea for what the scope might be, then back internally again. And then by the time you finally open it up and get proposals, I think you could get that done in about a month. So when I said, 2 to 3 months, that's also including the time internally to work through it together to make sure that you have everything buttoned up on your end. All right, let's see. And I think we had one or two more. The budget one was a big one that we actually just ended up including in the presentation. One question that was a little bit different than a typical scope is how do we communicate our organization's mission and values? So that's a good one to consider, because most of the time for website revamp projects, the copywriting and the messaging isn't often included within a scope. So if you did need copywriting or messaging incorporated, it's important to indicate that within the RFP so that you get that support you need. Good. So it doesn't look like we got any live questions, but those were the main questions that came through, and there a few of them were kind of related. So I do think we covered the other questions that were submitted within the presentation. If you do need any help with your RFP process, either writing it or having a vendor like ours to respond to yours, we'd be happy to help. This is our phone number here, my direct email, as well as our website, startcompeting.com. So thank you all for joining us today. We'll follow up with the slides as well as the webinar recording. Have a great day. All right, and thanks, Mary.